His name was Robert. He told me he was a retired Army colonel, a widower doing charity work in Africa. His words were a lifeline, a promise of a quiet, honorable life after my own chaotic career as an ER nurse. I fell for it. I fell for it as I sent him $30,000, my entire emergency fund, to get him out of a political jam. Then he disappeared. The shame nearly broke me. But in the ashes of that humiliation, I found a new purpose. My name is Meredith Vance, I am 57 years old, and I am the woman who was scammed. Now I hunt men like him. I find them, I expose them, and I teach other women how to stay safe from the predators who are still out there, waiting. This is the story of how a victim became a hunter. If you believe the best way to heal a wound is to turn it into a weapon, subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because class is now in session. Part 1. The email that destroyed my life was titled My North Star. It arrived, as they always did, just after my shift at the hospital. My dearest Meredith, it began. Even in this chaos, your voice is my compass. Robert. For 4 months, he had been the calm center of my storm-tossed life. I was a 57-year-old ER nurse, a year into a retirement I hadn't wanted. My life had been 35 years of controlled chaos, of beeping machines and split-second decisions, of life and death under the harsh fluorescent lights of a San Diego trauma center. The silence of retirement was deafening, a void filled only by the ghosts of sirens and the memory of my late husband, Tom. Robert had found me on a Facebook group for retired nurses. He was a retired Army colonel, a widower, now doing security consulting for a nonprofit building schools in rural Ghana. His profile was a study in quiet integrity. Photos of him in his dress uniform, pictures of him with smiling African children. He was a man of substance, of honor. He understood a life of service. His voice on the phone was a calm, steady baritone, a voice that promised safety. He wasn't like the other men on dating sites. He didn't offer empty flattery. He asked about my day. He listened. He called me his fellow warrior, his partner in a world gone mad. For the first time since Tom died, I felt like I was part of a team again. The jam he was in was so plausible, so perfectly tailored to my own life experience. He had witnessed something, he said, a local official demanding a bribe from the nonprofit. He had reported it, and now he was being retaliated against. His passport had been confiscated. He was being held unofficially, under a sort of house arrest at his hotel, until a fine was paid. It was $30,000. He was so ashamed to ask. His own funds were tied up in military pension bureaucracy. He just needed a short-term loan, enough to clear his name and get on a plane home to me. I was an ER nurse. I was a fixer. My entire life was about responding to emergencies. His story hit every single one of my buttons. A good man in trouble, an injustice that needed to be righted, a clear, actionable problem I could solve. The doubt I felt was a small, quiet whisper, easily drowned out by the blaring siren of my own need to be needed, to be the hero. I drove to the bank the next day. The young teller had looked at me with a flicker of concern as I initiated the wire transfer to an account in Ghana. "Are you sure about this, ma'am?" she had asked gently. I had looked her right in the eye, full of a righteous, protective love. "I'm sure," I had said. "It's a family emergency." The transfer went through. The next day, Robert's email account was deleted. His phone number was disconnected. His Facebook profile vanished. It was as if he had never existed. The silence that rushed back into my life was no longer just empty. It was filled with the roaring, deafening sound of my own, catastrophic foolishness. Part 2. For a full week, I did not leave my house. I was paralyzed by a shame so profound it felt like a physical illness. I had spent my career in the ER, a place where you develop a sixth sense for a lie. I could tell in a heartbeat if a patient was faking their symptoms to get a prescription. I could read the subtle tells of a domestic abuse victim trying to protect their abuser. I was a professional detector of deception. How had I missed this? How had this man, this phantom, so completely and utterly dismantled my defenses? The shame was not just in losing the money. It was in the total failure of the one skill I had prided myself on. My hidden power, the weapon I didn't yet know I had, was forged in that crucible of 35 years in the ER. It was not a single skill. It was a mindset. First, it was triage, the ability to assess a chaotic situation, identify the most critical wound, and act with decisive, focused calm. Second, it was pattern recognition, the ability to see 1,000 different cases of the flu and recognize the one that is actually meningitis, to see the subtle, repeated patterns that point to a deeper, hidden pathology. And third, and most importantly, it was a complete and total lack of squeamishness. I had seen the worst of humanity, and I was not afraid to get my hands dirty. My antagonist, Robert, was not just a con man. He was a master diagnostician of the human heart. He didn't just find lonely women, he found women with a savior complex. He profiled me perfectly. He saw retired nurse, and understood that my entire identity was built on helping, on fixing. His narrative of being a good man in an unjust jam was a custom-made lure for a woman like me. He wasn't just asking for money, he was presenting me with a patient, a critical case that only I could solve. He had used my greatest strength, my compassion, and turned it into my greatest weakness. He thought his job was done. He had no idea that I was about to turn my professional skills, my ability to triage a crisis, to recognize a pattern, and to face the ugliest parts of human nature without flinching, away from medicine and towards a new, much more personal kind of emergency response. Part 3. On the 8th day, the shame finally burned away, leaving behind the cold, hard bedrock of my professional training. I was an ER nurse, and this was a critical incident. The patient was my life. The wound was a $30,000 hemorrhage. My first step was to stop the bleeding, emotionally. I stood up, took a shower, got dressed, and made a pot of coffee. The pity party was over. The work was about to begin. The conflict was clear. I was a 57-year-old woman with a laptop, and my enemy was an anonymous, global phantom. The obstacle was the vast, untraceable expanse of the internet. A direct assault was impossible. I needed intelligence. My smart plan began not with a lawyer or the police, but with a simple methodical act of self-diagnosis. I started a new notebook. On the first page I wrote, Patient, Meredith Vance. Chief complaint, victim of romance scam. Then I began to chart my own case. I documented every single step of my own seduction and deception, from the first message on the Facebook group to the final, frantic wire transfer. I was not writing a diary, I was creating a diagnostic chart. I was looking for the pattern. For a week, I was a detective in my own life. I dissected his emails, analyzing his language, the specific emotional triggers he used. I reverse image searched every photo he had ever sent, finding, to my disgust, that the handsome Colonel Robert was in fact a semi-famous German architect whose photos had been stolen. I compiled a list of the specific fake charities he claimed to work for, the non-existent logistics companies he used as part of his stories. I was not just a victim anymore. I was the world's foremost expert on the con man who had called himself Robert. I was building a profile, a detailed, multi-page pathology report on a single, virulent strain of a global pandemic. This file, this patient chart, became my weapon. Part 4. The ticking clock of this new mission was my own financial survival. My emergency fund was gone. I was living on my pension and Social Security. I had to get a part-time job to make ends meet, a humbling experience that only fueled my righteous anger. I started working a few shifts a week at a local urgent care clinic, a constant reminder of the life of competence I had once known. My investigation led me into the dark, complex subplot of the online scam-baiting community. I discovered a world of digital vigilantes, people who proactively engaged with scammers, wasting their time, gathering their information, and shutting down their accounts. I lurked on their forums, a silent student. I learned their techniques, their jargon, their tools. I learned about IP grabbers, about how to trace the metadata in a simple email header, about the networks of money mules they used to launder their funds. It was a whole new field of medicine, and I was in training. The complexity of my plan was that I knew I couldn't just find Robert. That was a ghost. But I could find someone. These scammers, I learned, were lazy. They were creatures of habit. They used the same scripts, the same photos, the same fake charities, over and over again. My patient chart on Robert was not just a record of my own scam. It was a potential fingerprint for his entire network. I began to proactively hunt. I created a series of fake, vulnerable female profiles on the same dating sites and Facebook groups where they preyed. I was no longer a victim. I was a honeypot, a digital trap, waiting patiently for the same species of snake to slither into my inbox. Part 5. It took a month. A month of sifting through dozens of clumsy, amateurish scammers. And then one morning I saw him. The profile picture was different. This time, he was a Canadian doctor working for Doctors Without Borders in Syria. But the language in the first message was identical. The same opening line, the same self-deprecating joke, the same question about my favorite kind of music. It was him. Or at least it was one of his colleagues, using the same script. My heart hammered in my chest, a jolt of adrenaline that felt strangely familiar, like the moment a code blue is called in the ER. This was the turning point. The hunt was no longer theoretical. I had a live target. I engaged. I played the part of a lonely, recently divorced librarian from Oregon. I let him reel me in, all the while feeding our conversation to the scam-baiting community I had joined. This time, I was not a victim. I was a confidential informant. The real breakthrough came when he inevitably sent me a photo of his dog, a beautiful German shepherd. Just got this from my dog sitter. He wrote, "Missing my boy Kaiser." It was a different dog picture than the one Robert had used. But on the dog's collar, I could see a tiny, barely legible metal tag. I spent 6 hours with a suite of photo enhancement software I had downloaded, zooming in, sharpening, clarifying. And then I had it. It was not a name tag. It was a rabies tag. And on it, a phone number and a name. Bellevue Veterinary Clinic. A quick search revealed it was a real clinic. Not in Syria. In Lagos, Nigeria. This was the mistake. The single, stupid, arrogant mistake. This was not a stolen photo from the internet. This was a real photo of a real dog, a pet that belonged to the scammer. I had him. I had his location, a concrete, real-world starting point. The vengeance was no longer a digital fantasy. It now had a geographical coordinate. The lonely widow from San Diego was about to reach out and touch a criminal halfway across the world. Part 6. The consequence of finding that vet tag was that the entire operation escalated. I was no longer just a vigilante. I had credible, actionable intelligence. I contacted a journalist I had once treated in the ER, a tough, respected investigative reporter at a major national news organization. I laid out my entire story, not just my own victimization, but my subsequent investigation, culminating in the vet tag. She was hooked. The repercussion for the scammer, though he did not yet know it, was that he was no longer my target. He was the target of a major international news investigation. The journalist and her team, using the information I provided as a starting point, began to dig. They used their resources to contact the vet clinic in Lagos. They used their international bureaus to begin building a case. My role shifted again. I was now the primary source for a major exposé. I spent hours on the phone with the journalist, with her producers, providing every detail, every piece of evidence. I was not just telling my story. I was building a case for the entire world to see. The shame that had once silenced me was now the fuel for a story that was about to be broadcast to millions. I was no longer a victim. I was the key witness. Part 7. My growth in the final phase of the investigation was about finding my voice, literally. The journalist, a woman named Clara, asked if I would be willing to go on camera for the story. "Your voice, Meredith," she had said, "is the most powerful weapon we have. People need to see you. They need to see that this can happen to a strong, intelligent woman." The challenge felt insurmountable. My shame was still a raw, tender wound. The thought of showing my face to the world, of publicly admitting that I, a competent ER nurse, had been so thoroughly fooled, was terrifying. I had spent my career being the calm, anonymous professional in the background. The idea of becoming the story, of being the face of victimhood, was my greatest fear. I spent a weekend wrestling with the decision, walking for hours. Along the cliffs at Torrey Pines, the same place Tom and I used to walk. I thought about the other women, the ones I had seen on the scam-baiting forums, their stories full of a quiet, desperate shame. I thought about the very nature of this crime, how it thrives on the silence of its victims. The scammers don't just steal money. They steal your voice, your confidence. My refusal to speak, I realized, was a final victory for him. It was allowing him to keep me, and women like me, in the shadows where he wanted us. My transformation was in the decision I made on that cliffside. I called Clara back. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady. "But I have one condition. I don't want to be portrayed as a victim. I want to be portrayed as the person who fought back. I want to be part of the solution." Overcoming my shame was no longer a personal battle. It was a strategic necessity. I was not just going to tell my story. I was going to use it as a platform, a teaching tool. I worked with Clara and her team for weeks, not as a subject, but as a collaborator, a consultant. I helped them understand the psychology of the scam, the specific techniques the criminals used. I was no longer just a source. I was a subject matter expert. I was turning my most painful experience into my greatest area of expertise. Part 8. The climax of this story was not a single confrontation, but a coordinated, multi-platform media event. The news organization prepared to release a full 20-minute investigative segment on their flagship news magazine show. It would be accompanied by a long-form print article and a dedicated website with resources for victims. My preparation for this climax was deeply personal. I worked with Clara to write my own part of the story. I wrote not just about the pain and the shame, but about the process of fighting back. I wrote about the ER nurse's mindset, about triage, about pattern recognition. I turned my personal story into a universal lesson plan, a how-to guide for self-defense in the digital world. The tension was in the waiting. We knew that the moment the story aired, the lives of the men in that call center in Lagos would be changed forever. We also knew that my life would never be the same. I was about to step out of the shadows, permanently. The final piece of preparation was a single, devastatingly effective move by the news organization's legal team. Working with international law enforcement liaisons, they were able to get a temporary, court-ordered freeze on a series of bank accounts in Europe that the investigative team had linked to the scamming network. They were cutting off the money flow at the exact same moment we were about to expose the operation to the world. It was a perfect, two-pronged assault of public exposure and financial strangulation. Part 9. The night the news magazine segment aired, I was in a hotel room in New York with Clara and her team. We watched it on a large monitor in a quiet editing bay. The segment was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. It started with my story, my voice calm and steady, telling the world what had happened to me. They showed the fake photos of Robert, and then they showed the real, unflattering photos of the young men in Lagos who were behind the persona. The climax of the segment was a piece of undercover footage their international team had managed to acquire. It showed the inside of the call center, a chaotic room full of young men at computers, working from scripts, a place they had dubbed the Love Factory. The journalist, using the information I had provided, then walked the viewers through exactly how the scam worked, showing the scripts, the fake documents, the networks of money mules. And then came the final, crushing blow. The host of the show looked directly into the camera. "Tonight," she said, "we have decided to take an unprecedented step." She then held up a photo. It was a picture of the young, arrogant scammer whose dog had been his undoing, the first one I had unmasked. His name was Liam. "This is Liam," the host said, his real name broadcast to the world. "He, and the 12 other men whose photos you are about to see, are the subjects of an international fraud investigation that began with the courage of one woman they thought was an easy target." One by one they showed the clear, real-life photos of the scammers, their names printed below. They were no longer anonymous phantoms. They were just criminals, their faces exposed for the entire world to see. My vengeance was not just in their exposure. It was in the final scene of the broadcast. It was a shot of me, standing on the cliffs at Torrey Pines, looking out at the ocean, my face calm and strong. And my voiceover said, "He stole my money and he broke my heart. But he did not break me. My name is Meredith Vance, and I am not a victim. I am the woman who hunts men like him." Part 10, Conclusion. The rebirth. Approximate. 500 words. The impact of the broadcast was immediate and seismic. The public exposure led to a swift crackdown by Nigerian authorities, resulting in multiple arrests. The story went viral globally, a powerful human interest story with a clear villain and a triumphant hero. The scammers' entire operation, which had thrived in the darkness of their victims' shame, withered in the sudden, bright glare of the international spotlight. The long-term consequence for me was a new, unexpected, and profoundly meaningful career. The response to the story was overwhelming. I was inundated with messages from other women, thousands of them, from all over the world, sharing their own stories, thanking me for speaking up. The emotional resolution was in the discovery of this massive, silent sisterhood. I was not alone. I worked with Clara, the journalist, to create a nonprofit organization, the Meredith Project. It was an online resource and support network for victims of romance scams. We provided education, resources for reporting the crimes, and a safe, anonymous community for women to share their stories and heal. My pain had been transformed into a global platform for advocacy and protection. A year later, I was on a video call with a support group from the Meredith Project. A woman from Australia, her voice trembling but strong, was telling the group how she had just successfully identified and reported a scammer, using the pattern recognition techniques she had learned from our website. I felt so stupid at first, she said. But then I remembered you, Meredith. And I decided to be a nurse, not a patient. I smiled. The work was hard. But the world was a little bit safer. Knowledge is the best defense. These predators rely on a playbook, a script of psychological manipulation. By learning their tactics, we can protect ourselves and the people we love. This story is not just a tale of revenge, it is a lesson in how to turn the tables, how to move from being a target to being a hunter. Share this story. Talk about it with your friends, your mothers, your sisters. The more we bring this crime out of the shadows, the less power it has. If this story of a woman who fought back and created a community of warriors inspired you, please like and subscribe.